Hey everyone, so we need to go over part of the appendicular skeleton online this week. So I chose to cover the arm and what we call the shoulder or pectoral girdle. And if you go to your list, let's just do this really quick. You'll notice that after the vertebrae, you've got a part of the list called the histology of compact bone, and it's got some stuff listed there. I'm going to do you a favor and not cover this in lab class. This is lecture stuff, and I won't hold you accountable for it in lab. So don't worry about that histology component, okay? I won't make you know that for the lab test. You'll need to know it for lecture, especially if you're with me. I'll cover that in Chapter 6 in lecture. But all of this histology stuff, we're going to delete. Where we're going to start today is where it says appendicular skeleton on page 6. And we're going to cover, in this video, the first half of the arm. And then I'm going to make a second video to split things up that's going to cover the lower portion of our arm. So our arm is held in place by these bones called the shoulder girdle. And I want to start off with those bones, and then we'll cover the humerus with this as well. The trickiest part of our arm is the elbow. So our elbow is a little bit tricky because there's a lot of structures that make up our elbow. And so I'm going to cover that at the end here. And let's start with the first bone on the list, which is the clavicle. The clavicle is commonly just called our collarbone. And it's really easy. Look, there's nothing on the clavicle, no structures that you have to know. And so all you got to know is the clavicle. So let me show you what it is. Here is our clavicle. So it may be just sitting on the table, and you've got to identify it as the clavicle. No structures. It is our collarbone. It actually, I had it backwards. It'll fit like this. And that is our clavicle. The next bone is the scapula. Now the scapula is just our shoulder blade, but it's got 4 things that you need to know. Some of them, well, actually all 4 of them are pretty easy. Some of them are a little bit easier than the others. So let's look at the scapula. So here's our scapula. All right, it is our shoulder blade, so it's going to sit like this. And if you look at the shoulder blade, the first thing you want to do is orient it properly so that you know its position. This blade is going to always point down, and your shoulder is a ball and socket joint. So the ball and socket joint are always on the outside, right? So the scapula contains the socket of your ball and socket where your humerus is going to attach into it. So the way that it's positioned is this is always pointing down, and the socket is always pointing to the outside. Now, if you look at the list, it has little asterisks next to the scapula. This means that you need to know left from right. See, it says that, if I scooch this all the way down, it says it at the bottom. So these asterisks mean you've got to tell me left or right. So any bone that has those asterisks, you got to tell me if it's a left scapula or a right scapula. And the best way to do that is just look at it and then orient it on your body. So this scapula is going to fit on my right side. So this is a right scapula. Now, we got to know these parts and pieces. If you look at the list, it has two processes, the acromion process and the coracoid process. These are things that stick out of the bone, right? So if you look at this, we've got two projections that are sticking out of the top of the scapula. The one on the top, this flat one that's sitting on the top, is called the acromion process. And it's attached to this big ridge that runs down called the spine. So the scapula has a spine, which is this ridge, that turns into the acromion process. The one below it is our coracoid process. So it's the guy that sticks down below it when you hold it up. Acromion process, coracoid process. Spine is the ridge. And then the only thing left is what we call the glenoid cavity, or you can call it the glenoid fossa. The glenoid cavity is the socket part of your ball and socket joint. So it's this part right here. This is your glenoid cavity. It's where your humerus fits in. So the humerus fits into the glenoid cavity. So this is our scapula. And you need to take a minute when you get into class, find a scapula and figure out left and right. If you have to go over to a skeleton that's articulated, do it, figure it out, orient it, try and get it so it's correctly on the back, because you got to be able to tell me right or left. All right? So that takes care of what we call the pectoral or shoulder girdle. It's the bones that kind of hold our arm onto our body. Now, if we continue down the list, we're going to see this humerus. Now, the humerus seems like a pretty crazy bone because it's got a lot of structures. It's actually not that bad. And so I want to go over this humerus with you. And the humerus is our upper arm bone. All right, so our upper arm bone is the humerus. And the humerus is another bone that you're going to have to be able to tell me if it's left or right. The first thing on the list are these things called tubercles. So you're going to see these tubercles. It says the greater and lesser tubercle. Well, on the ball or the head of the humerus, we're going to have these two bumps. You've got a bump on the outside and a bump in the front. These are tubercles. So the greater tubercle is on the outside of your shoulder. So it's right here. And then the lesser tubercle is in the front. So it's going to be right on the front of your shoulder. So if you look at the ball, this is what's going to go into the glenoid cavity. On the outside of the bone is our greater tubercle. Then on the front is the lesser tubercle. This is kind of how you can tell left from right, because it's going to fit into the glenoid fossa. So this rounded ball for the ball and socket joint is on the inside. The lesser tubercle is in the front. See, it's that bump. And then the greater tubercle is on the side. So I'm actually holding a right humerus. So I've got a right humerus. All right, so that takes care of the beginning. So we've got these greater and lesser tubercles. All right. Now, what's kind of crazy is that the rest of this list that makes up the humerus structures are all on the elbow. So if you look at the humerus, the elbow is the most complex. This is where our elbow is. And so if I, put this in the right spot, all those other structures are going to be on this elbow section. Now, I think what I'm going to do, just so you can see it really well, is I'm going to put it on my document camera, and I'm going to just set this humerus down with the elbow end visible. So this is the elbow end of our humerus. Now, if you look at the list, let's see if I can orient this a little bit so I can have both the list and our bone on here. Let's see, let's do it this way. Okay, so you've got the bone list and the humerus itself. Now, here's the trick. You've got to realize that our elbow is a little bit more than just a hinge joint. So the elbow itself, if you look at our elbow, let me see if I can, there we go. Okay, so the elbow is a hinge joint, but it also allows us to pivot our hand. So it's more than a hinge. It's a hinge where you can do the tomahawk chop for the Kansas City Chiefs, but it's also a pivot where I can pivot my hand. All right, so the elbow is a little complex, and that's what we've got to kind of focus on here when we look at this. So the end of the humerus, first of all, let's just get rid of some of the easier ones. These things called epicondyles. Remember, a condyle is a rounded knob at a joint. An epicondyle are bumps that are above the condyles. So first of all, the humerus, these rounded bumps right here are the condyles. Now, on the humerus, they're special because the elbow's special, so they give them specific names that I'll cover here in a second. But above them, we've got these big bumps. So you've got a big bump on the inside of your elbow, and then a much smaller bump right here on the outside of your elbow. These are the epicondyles. Now, the one on the inside is big. It's a big fat condyle. So it's the medial condyle because it is on the inside. So this big bump is the medial condyle, and you can actually feel it on your own elbow. So if you hold your elbow up and you feel on the inside here, that bump right there is your medial epicondyle. So the medial epicondyle is on the inside of the humerus. This small bump right here is the lateral epicondyle, and it's on the outside of the humerus. So these epicondyles are kind of easy. The two condyles actually have specific names, the capitulum and the trochlea. The capitulum looks like half a marble. It's a round marble. And it's on the outside. It's on lateral, towards the lateral epicondyle. This rounded marble is the capitulum. And then if you look, the other one looks sort of like a saddle. This one that's on the inside towards the medial epicondyle, this is the trochlea. So the capitulum and trochlea are just condyles. They just have specific names. So the rounded marble is the capitulum. The saddle towards the inside is the trochlea. And then you've got two fossas. You have the olecranon fossa and you have the coronoid fossa. So I actually showed you the olecranon fossa when we were learning these terms. If you flip over the humerus so that you're looking at the back, this fossa where this thumb imprint is, this is the olecranon fossa. So it's the big one on the back of the humerus. If we flip it over to the front where we can see the capitulum and the trochlea, the coronoid fossa is on the front right here. So you have the capitulum, the trochlea, the coronoid fossa, flip it over, the olecranon fossa, then you've got these epicondyles. The big epicondyle, big round one, is the medial epicondyle, and then the one on the outside, a much smaller bump, is the lateral epicondyle, and that is the humerus. So the humerus is probably the most difficult of all of our appendicular bones, the arms and legs, to learn because of that elbow. So I'm going to do a second video next that's going to go over the lower arm, and we're going to talk about this elbow a little bit more and put the elbow together so that it kind of makes sense to you, hopefully. All right, I'll see you in the next video when we cover the lower arm. All right, have a good one.